So then once the data is spread around, we want to be able to do some interesting work on all of this. There's an entire continuum of applications that you might want to consider executing in a parallel environment. We're going to walk through, just kind of give you some of a conceptual model for how the spectrum works. So if you imagine that you're a city planner and you want to build up a city of many different buildings, well, there's a natural way to speed this process up. So instead of having one crew do all the work, we can split the work up and hire many crews. Each crew works on each building independently so that we get really nice parallel performance out of all of these crews because they don't have to, they're not dependent on each other to do the operations. So in computer science, that sort of computation is called embarrassingly parallel, when many different workers, many different computers can work on different pieces of the problem totally independently from each other. This is well supported in a Hadoop or MapReduce environment using something called a map-only computation. So rather than having the computers ever talk to each other, you have your data spread across your big cluster. On each of those computers, you're going to do some local processing to take your input and then compute some output from it without any sort of interaction between them. The next most complicated environment is say you're trying to build one building that's 100 stories tall. Before that sort of central infrastructure is built, it doesn't really help you to have 100 teams or one team or 1,000 team work on it. What you really need is some sort of coordination so that if you have 10 teams, build up the infrastructure for, say, 10 floors together, but then each of those different teams can then work independently. So in this way, there'll be phases of synchronized work between the different workers, but then independent work takes place in different phases as well. This is sort of the conceptual model for that loosely coupled MapReduce paradigm, where you're going to have mappers that will work independently. Then there's going to be a phase of shuffling where they're going to have to all communicate with each other, and then another phase of reducers that then can also work independently to get good parallel performance. And then at the other extreme, we have our other sort of most complicated problems to be able to accelerate. So the idea is instead of growing up a forest of many trees, we're interested in growing one very, very, very large tree. Right? It's not clear how having one farmer or 10 farmers or 100 farmers is going to really help us, right? There's only, all that needs to happen is one farmer is going to add the water, the nutrients, and so forth. It doesn't really help to have extra farmers in general, although there are sometimes ways to take what looks like a tightly coupled problem and decompose it into new ways to be able to process it so that adding 100 different farmers can be really helpful. So in a MapReduce paradigm, this is often done through what's called iterative MapReduce, where you have a map followed by a reduce, just like you would normally, but then the output from reduce becomes the input from the next mapper, which is followed up by reduce, so that you have this chain of a MapReduce followed by another MapReduce, followed by another MapReduce, followed by another MapReduce. And that's because during that shuffle stage, it's possible for the different workers to communicate with each other, even in a tightly coupled environment. So let's walk through some of these different applications in a genomic setting in more detail. So again, the simplest application is embarrassingly parallel. And what I'm trying to show here on the right is, imagine you have 4 different data files. You're going to run 4 different computations. So there's this really famous program in biology called BLAST. So what we're going to do is, on each of those different input files, we're just going to run a separate copy of BLAST, and that'll create 4 different output files. This is just, it's a standard sort of queuing technology, standard sort of cluster technology. It works really well with programs like Condor or SumGrid Engine. It also works really well in a MapReduce environment, just using one of those map-only applications. The way you can think about this is, we're trying to choreograph some sort of dance between all these different computers, just that the dance is very simple, that we're going to have like one master or one teacher in the head of the classroom that's going to say, do this, and then all of the workers in the classroom are going to do exactly the same work on their independent data sets. So you do get really nice scaling in the sense that if you can add more and more workers, they can all do the same operations in a synchronized way to get really nice performance speed up.